Thank you everyone for joining us today on our next Zoom talk for the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome. My better half, or my better, is giving the presentation today. He's going to be talking about the novel coronavirus. And this is this particular presentation is one that Dave is giving because he was asked to give it, but and it took him a lot of time to organize and manage and figure out what was good and what wasn't. In his background working for Health Canada, he did a lot of policy analyst work for the government, and he's really quite good at organizing and synthesizing a lot of data from a lot of sources. And this is one where he was trying to make good on all of the information that's coming in about the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus that we're dealing with. So with that, I'd pass it over to Dave, and I hope everybody enjoys themselves.
Welcome, everybody. As Jean mentioned, I was asked to give a talk on the novel virus. And that was because there were some questions swirling around in people's heads about the virus and the diseases that it causes. And I piped up at some point and said that I knew a little bit about this. And so I was challenged to see if I could put together a presentation. So here we go. You'll notice in the bottom right of the first screen, there's a little red number. I have tried to include citations throughout the presentation. I'm not going to mention any of them as I go through other than this one. These citations are either sources of things like the image that you see in front of you, or particular data, sometimes of people's opinions, or they're really good things that you can use as supplementary reading. In addition to that, I'm going to point out some further supplementary material. So that's the coronavirus in orange. There was so much material I accumulated in trying to put together this presentation that I decided it really needed to be cut into two parts. There's going to be a second presentation in January. And to deal just with the virus itself, not with what's it done to our society and how have we responded to it. And that'll be in the second one. What I'm hoping to do is to allow each of us to understand better what's happening and to make judgments about what the likely effects are going to be on ourselves and those that we love, and to make judgments about our personal activities. Perhaps it will get some people to see that public interest ought really to take precedence over personal freedom and individual rights. Although I would argue that no greater threat to your personal freedom than death. So even this section still had so much material. There are over 200 slides in the deck. I'm not going to present them all. They've been divided with a colored background. I'm going to go through the section that has a white background. There are extra details in the blue section, some caveats on how I put it together in the orange section, further information about life forms and major diseases in the purple and yellow sections, and all the sections in the green backgrounded section at the end. And if you see a citation, and let's say in the purple section on life forms, and you want to know where that is, when you go to the citations subsection with the green background, you'll see a colored stripe on the side that'll help to orient you to the right part of the list for citations that have to do with your particular section. There is also an 83-page companion document because there was a great deal of material that came together in the last month or so that I really couldn't fit into the talk. And so if you've got about 3 hours to do some additional reading, it's small type. There's a lot of great stuff in graphics that have been shrunk down in there, but you can have a read of that as well. So where we start? Well, each of us is familiar with the life that we can see around us, but most of us really don't see what I call quasi-life. There are some organisms, I'll call them organisms, not even clear they really are organisms out there. Mycoplasma does count as an organism, but it sure is way different than all the normal types of life. And you could read about that further if you want. I actually got infected by a mycoplasma at one point in my life. But the other big one that's quasi-life is viruses. These things don't have any functions of their own. They just take over cells of other organisms and make copies of themselves using the machinery of those cells. They're extremely small, on the order of 2 or 3 orders of magnitude smaller than most bacteria. There's some more detail about that in the section at the end. In my opinion, infectious diseases are less prominent in our lives today than they once were, and that's mainly because of largely Western medicine, which has brought us vaccination and medications that can fight a lot of these infectious diseases, either prevent you from getting ill or make it so that you are not severely affected by these diseases. However, the red ones are infectious or communicable diseases, and they still kill an awful lot of people. So lower respiratory infections, think pneumonias, anything that makes your lungs ill, are number 4 on the list, and they kill around 3 million people each year. And I think in the end, we're probably going to see that most of the deaths associated with this novel virus get put into that category, though you will see in the presentation that that may be somewhat problematic. So diseases can hit us in several different types of ways. Endemic diseases are ones that are constantly present. From time to time, an epidemic may break out from an endemic disease, or you could have a disease introduced into a place where there has been no disease previously, and it can break out into an epidemic. If that epidemic becomes very widespread, it'll be called a pandemic. So this might be across a very large country like the United States or Russia or Canada. It might be across a continent. It might be, in the case of the one we're experiencing now, the entire world. So this novel virus was first noted by the medical community in December in China. However, since then we've learned that it's very probable the first case was in November. There are even some reports indicating that there may have been cases in December, possibly as early as November, in places other than China. There is more information about that in some of the supplementary reading. The World Health Organization was notified that we had an unidentified organism causing pneumonia right at the end of December. And by the end of January, you had about 6,000 cases in China and 250 deaths. This really was coming as a surprise to people, to the point where it appears that some people literally did die in the streets. And very soon after that, it was beginning to emerge elsewhere. By the middle of March, there were 120,000 cases and 4,500 deaths. And public health officials and epidemiologists around the world were really very scared because of some recent experiences with several other coronaviruses and with influenzas, not to mention Ebola, HIV, and some others. There is quite a list at the end. I think over 20 diseases are covered in the yellow section, and you might ask yourself, if you read that section, which disease has been the worst for people? I think in my considered estimation, it probably has been smallpox, but you can read some of the data there for yourself. There are lots of different ways of charting the progress of diseases. This is one I particularly liked in the bottom part of the screen. And the reason I like it is because if you're in the fast growth period for the virus, you'll be right close to this line. If you're not experiencing very fast growth, you'll be going sideways. And if you've come out and are now going down, you'll drop pretty well straight down, because this is a log plot. So, okay, so along the side here, every time you go up, you're going up by a factor of 10, and the same as you go sideways here. They allow you to chart all of the places that have had more than 50 cases at this particular site. I just happened to show those 5 because it was convenient. By the middle of February, you had cases appearing in Hong Kong and Singapore. By the end of February, in another half dozen places. By early March, you had over a dozen countries added. And very quickly, it basically went all the way around the world. You'll see on some of the reporting sites these days, 218 different jurisdictions are mentioned, and I think there are only something like 200 recognized countries in the world. There have also been outbreaks on many military vessels and cruise ships. There's a list in the extra readings. This is a different way of looking at the progress of the pandemic. This is actually a screen capture of a set of racing graphs. So as a country appears, as it gets cases, it'll appear on the chart. And as it gets more and more cases, its bar will run to the right. At the same time, if the most advanced country is getting higher and higher, the whole background will shift to the left, and all of these will get correspondingly smaller. You actually don't want to be on this list, of course, because the higher up you are on the list, the more cases you have, the worse your society is doing. And you'll see that Canada has actually dropped off this list at this particular point in time. This was taken in early October. And at the time, the world had around 36 million cases. A month before that, we had passed 1 million dead. We have now passed 1.5 million dead, and we've passed 68 million cases. But if you want about an 8-minute watch, that's really kind of fascinating, watching the horse race. I wanted to know early on whether the size of a particular population that's being reported by a jurisdiction made a difference to the infection rate and the death rate. It turns out no. For anybody who knows statistics, there's a very low R-squared value, very bad fit, wide scatter on the points, so any country can get any level of infection, it would appear. So why is it that we might have been hit by this novel virus? In my opinion, it's because we continue to deforest the world, and we're eating a lot of the animals that were in those forests or are still in those forests where they exist. We're building our cities ever denser, our populations are getting bigger. This is Europe taken as from a polar perspective, so the top is the south. And you can see that the whole southern half of Europe, all of this is very highly populated. The denser the population, the higher the bars will get. So for example, here's Moscow with something, last I looked, I think it was about 8 million people. And I would say, again, this is my opinion, that public health measures have not been adequately upgraded. So we are really not building bigger cities, denser cities, with recognition of the fact that we're creating problems for ourselves. So shortly after they identified that we had a novel virus, they were able to determine exactly what its genome was. That is, what is the genetic sequence inside the virus. Turns out this is an RNA virus, that's ribonucleic acid. It was characterized using polymerase chain reaction, PCR technology. And shortly after, it was captured on micrographs. You can see one here. And shortly after that, people started making artist conceptions of the virus. It was clearly a coronavirus, so-called corona, because on the outside, you've got all these spikes. And when you look at it from a distance, it sort of looks like a crown. Coronaviruses, it turns out, are actually quite common. They do cause colds. They recently caused a lot of concern in the public health community because one of them causes Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, and another causes SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. As you can see, if we look a little bit later, actually in the major part of the talk, but also in the added reading, both very deadly viruses. And I would argue that SARS, which is actually SARS-CoV for coronavirus, will soon get relabeled as either SARS-CoV-1 or SARS-1 for short. SARS-CoV-2, which is the novel virus, the name it has now, will probably likely soon be called just SARS-2. I can't see us really for very long continuing to use the long name, no particular point. Early on, it actually had a different name, which was 2019-nCoV, even harder to say. For clarification, the virus is SARS-2. The disease that it causes is coronavirus disease, so COVID, COVID. But as we saw in the previous slide, many different coronaviruses cause disease in humans, so this one specifically was labeled COVID-19. And when I'm sending out information over Twitter about this virus, I drop the dash because every single letter you use in Twitter is important. You're limited to the number of letters you can use. SARS-2 doesn't just cause COVID-19. It also causes MISC. It also causes ARDS, post-COVID syndrome, post-intensive care syndrome can come from having had SARS-2. It can also come from having other things that have caused you to go into intensive care. So the virus is covered with a lipoprotein coat. It gets that coat as it exits the cell. It will attach using its spikes to a receptor on the outside of human cells called ACE2, angiotensin converting enzyme. And once it's become attached, the virus will get integrated with the cell wall and pass inside the cell. At that point, it can release its RNA, and then a bunch of other things happen. So the ACE2 receptors are present in epithelial cells. Largely, these line the airways, especially the lungs, also the nose, but they're also present in the blood vessels, which effectively means that SARS-2 can infect virtually any part of your body. And we're already seeing people who have come away with kidney damage, who have come away with blood clots, strokes, brain damage, and myocarditis, which is basically illness of the heart. So it's not just pneumonia. Not too long ago, we actually found out that there's another chemical which is expressed on the outside of human cells called neuropilin-1, which appears to facilitate entry of the virus into our cells. And quite concerningly, it appears to have an analgesic effect. So people who are asymptomatic and people who are mildly symptomatic may well not feel the usual kind of pain that people feel when they get sick. This probably leads people to believe they are not really affected or not at all affected, and therefore to wander around in public, in all likelihood passing on the virus to others. I will be looking into whether neuropilin-1, NRP1, might give us a window to combat SARS-2 as part of part 2. So the symptoms were initially thought to include a low-grade fever, a dry cough, and fatigue. But fairly quickly, a wide variety of other symptoms started to be noticed, documented. There are some here, and there's a chart at the end that actually compares the symptoms for COVID-19, the disease, as compared to colds, influenza, and seasonal allergies. And certainly, we have a lot more going on than just the kind of thing that you might imagine with a cold. You do get nausea and vomiting. You can get diarrhea, for example. And as with SARS-1, it's quite possible that this virus can be spread through feces and feces that get into the air when the toilet is flushed. This is really probably the first important point that I was able to gain from literature, and that is that SARS-2 victims typically don't have runny noses and are not sneezing. In particular, if you're asymptomatic, you won't be sneezing. You probably won't be coughing. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Asymptomatic carriers are definitely infected, and they're known to shed and pass on the virus to others. Pre-symptomatic carriers, that is people who are going to get some symptoms a few days later, if you go back and look at their experience, can do the same. If you look at the blue line here, there's a black pointer to it. The blue line shows that you are shedding the virus before you get symptoms. So this is the point at which symptoms are occurring, and you are shedding the virus before you ever show any symptoms, as many as 5 and it may be more days before you get sick. Your viral shedding and your symptoms will peak just at about the same time. And that's usually around 10 to 12 days. We're going to see some more about how long you get sick in a moment. So a single virus particle is called a virion. It's extremely small, as I mentioned before. When you cough or sneeze and do a variety of other things like talking or singing, droplets will come out of your mouth. They have a wide variety of size ranges. If you want to look numerically at the number of droplets that come out, most of them are extremely small, submicroscopic. We can call them microdroplets. So the things that are less than 5 microns, 5 micrometers, can be labeled as microdroplets. And so the microdroplets will go a long way away from your face. The droplets tend to fall out, and they'll typically go onto any nearby surface within about a meter, and to allow for some slop, if you will, we choose to use 2 meters as a safe distance for most people to avoid getting droplets. That's not microdroplets, just droplets. So as soon as a droplet exits your body, it will begin to evaporate. The smaller it is, the faster it's going to evaporate. And it turns out that anything up to about 90 microns is probably going to evaporate before it hits the floor. Once it's evaporated, it's become a droplet nucleus and has joined with the microdroplets and will float in the air for extended periods, many, many hours. The trajectory of such particles, very hard to establish, very hard to study too. The viral load is very likely in the microdroplets. Very controversial area in the science at the moment. But we know, for example, from influenza, which many in the public health community refuse to admit is transmitted through airborne means, that's where the virus is, in the microdroplets. And this is really crucial, because if we're eliminating the droplets, but we're not eliminating the microdroplets, people will still get infected. There's going to be more in part 2 that covers things like the infection that's going on in our medical community. So here are the 3 basic methods of transmission. The top one is close contact. If you're close to someone who coughs, spits, or sings in your face, for example, you could get droplets into your nose, mouth, or eyes. Alternatively, at the bottom, surfaces that get virus on them are called fomites. You might come along and with your hand pick up virus particles, virions, from such a surface, and then put your hand into your nose, mouth, or eyes and transfer virus. Early on, these two methods, these two transmission routes were thought to be the only ways the virus could be passed on. As it turns out, over time, the one in the middle, airborne, is increasingly looking like it's very important. So we still don't know what the infectious dose is. How many virions do you have to get over what period of time before you're actually going to be infected? We just don't know. Even as late as October, I haven't had a chance to read whatever scientific literature might have come out in the last couple of weeks, but I haven't seen anything indicating that we know this. I do know there is one scientific study that's probably going to wrap up in January, and it might be able to show us exactly what the infectious dose might be. On the other hand, we do know, I've added these black lines right here, the thick black lines that are vertical. We do know that for various means of public transit and for various places where people spend lots of time, usually during the day, 3 hours is where that vertical bar is. It runs you about a 50% chance of getting infected. You can look at those graphs in detail at your own leisure later. There are some very nice models coming out. This is only one of 3. I'm going to show you a couple of slides regarding it. What we got here is a small room. One patient may even not be symptomatic, is in that room with some other people. After 4 hours, in their model, everybody else is going to be infected. If everyone is wearing a mask, 4 out of the 5 other people, so 80% of the other people in that room are going to be infected after 4 hours. If there's good ventilation, probably only one person, and probably that person will have had to spend some time in close contact, so within the cloud that's coming off of this patient. Susceptibility to the illness does not appear to differ between men and women, although there are some minor differences in various age groups. However, deaths do differ. Men are dying at a higher rate than women. So this shows you exactly that. This is not numbers. This is the proportion of people who die once they get the illness. So it's far greater for men than it is for women. That was in Spain. The type of activity in which you are engaged really matters. If you're inside, don't have good ventilation, you're in proximity to others, you run a really high risk of infection. Many other types of workers, if you've got pre-existing conditions, your disease may well be worse. And as you might guess, some of these things are related to blood vessels, such as hypertension and heart disease. Don't mistake this though. Don't think that, well, it's only people with existing conditions and that's not very many, so we don't really need to worry about it. In fact, about age 35, half of all people in Canada have got one chronic condition. Maybe not one of the ones listed there. There are others that are implicated with this disease. And certainly there are more than just the ones that happen to be linked to SARS2 and COVID. But it's a lot of people. And it's certainly the case that under about age 60, most of the cases are occurring. Yes, most of the deaths are going to occur in the group that's over 60. So here you can see the bars really get higher for the older age groups. This one isn't the proportion of the people in the age group who get infected who die. It's total numbers, which is why you see many more women than men dying in this age group. That's because there are already a lot more women in this age group a lot of the men have already died from something else. Don't make it very far beyond 80. Sorry, any of you who know me know that almost every December I get laryngitis. So it does appear that melanin deficient people get this COVID-19 disease, this COVID disease. Shouldn't say it that way. That's like saying it's PIN number. Many people who are melanin deficient, that is white, like myself, are somehow protected from getting this disease and getting the more serious forms of the disease. It might be related to vitamin D. It might also be related to things like social conditions, where one lives or where one works, how one travels, and so on. However, the determinants of health with respect to SARS2 are all up in the air, still being intensively studied. And one of the worst times to be trying to figure out what's going on in a pandemic is when you're still in the pandemic, which of course we are. SARS2 acts quite differently in children than it does in adults. They do have high viral loads. They do transmit the virus, and sometimes they get extremely ill. We've had quite a number of children who got missed who died. So this is the comparative infectiousness of the disease. Without treatment, rapid treatment actually, people who get rabies virus, 100% of them die. Nowhere near that with measles and smallpox. Actually, that point is related to something we're going to see in a minute. Let me retract to the reproductive number at the top. This is R0 or R0. So at time 0, what is the reproductive number for the virus? And that number is the number of people who are going to get sick from one patient. With measles, it's 15. With MERS, that's Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, it's under 1. Seasonal influenza is a little bit more than 1. SARS2 is more than twice that. RT can be changed by behavior. So during the course of the pandemic, RT, that's T for time, will change. Here's an example. The Ottawa Public Health people have calculated what the R value was over time. And I'm not sure how they got to the point where they had RT being close to 1, which means you don't have an expanding outbreak at the time during October, because you're going to see some graphs later that'll show that we actually were having a lot of cases at the time. Once the virus gets into you, it can take anywhere from 1 day to about a month to come out with symptoms. And the mean incubation period is about 5 days. So if, for example, we were to bring in some new measure that would cut the spread of the virus today, we would still be seeing new cases for at least a month. Most of those cases would come within the next week. You can get a variety of different levels of illness. I'm going to go down towards the bottom and come back to the top in a minute. The medical community had never seen anything like it and didn't have a word for it, but many of the people who got SARS2 and were badly affected turned out to be what they labeled themselves as long haulers. So even though they aren't testing positive for the virus in the typical nose swab, these people are still very, very sick. Now, just to go back for a moment to the top, there have even been some cases of people who were asymptomatic and didn't feel sick, but who had low blood oxygen levels. And that may be key in terms of medical care. So this is actually the slide where I wanted to mention rabies. 100% of the people who get rabies without fast treatment are going to die. And with these various other viruses, we've had some pretty nasty experiences. You can see MERS here. caused about 34% of the people who got it to die. SARS-1, it was about 10%. At the moment, we're running a little bit over 2% for SARS-2, although, as we're going to see in a minute, because of the way that cases are counted, this is a very problematic number. H1N1 in 1918-19, this is sometimes known as the Spanish flu, perhaps better labeled as the Allied flu or even the American flu for reasons that you can divine on your own through extra reading, was about twice as bad as SARS-2 as far as we currently are aware. So about 40%, and you'll see in a moment that the estimates vary from about 20 to about 75% of people who get it are going to be asymptomatic. So now just looking at the ones who are symptomatic, about 80% of them are going to have mild illness. They won't need to go to hospital. About 20% are going to need to go to hospital. Of that 20% who go to hospital, about a quarter are going to need to go into the ICU. Early on, we were putting a lot of people in ICU and we were giving them mechanical ventilation. It was discovered that that was actually not the best way to treat these patients, and it was better to try to keep them off a ventilator if possible and just have them on oxygen. So we thought that SARS-2 had a lot of similarities to the H1N1 influenza. It was so deadly in 1918-19 and about which we were so scared in 2009-10 because of something called a cytokine storm. As it turns out, it may be that there's another molecule called bradykinin, and a bradykinin storm may be the culprit. As I mentioned earlier, people who are getting severely affected can have blood clots, strokes, brain damage, myocarditis, a number of other complications. Even some of the people who have very mild symptoms are suffering hallucinations. If you get it and you don't get very sick, you're probably going to recover in 2 to 3 weeks, although you might be subject to being a long haul. If you get hospitalized, you're probably going to be in there 3 to 6 weeks. And if you get very sick, especially if you go to the ICU, you could easily be in there for 2.5 months. Long COVID, these are the long haulers. Many of these people have been released from the hospital because they had a PCR test that said they were not positive. And some of them have been young, some of them have been otherwise healthy adults, some of them have been high-level athletes, and now they're no longer able to do their sports because they're so sick. One thing that is bothering me a bit is I don't know whether these long haulers are actually effective. I haven't seen anything that has proven that they're not. So for the people who do go into intensive care, they don't just come out and go right back to the way things were before. They're probably going to need rehabilitation. Expensive, of course. So the immune response that you get to this virus is in 2 arms. They tend to refer to these as arms. One is the so-called innate response, and the other is the antibody response, if you want to look at it that way. If you want to go and read some of this stuff, the level of detail that is available is mind-boggling. The complexity is mind-boggling. I would not be surprised if it very quickly goes over your head, because it certainly did go over mine. So we do know that you can get reinfected. We've had a number of reports of this. We even had a medical researcher who, after having had it, decided he was going to allow himself to get reinfected to see whether he could. And in fact, he did, and it was worse. So I know we have the virus vaccine about to come on the market, but at the moment, we have no idea how long that may protect us. The PCR standard for analysis, again, this graph shows that you can be shedding the virus before you show any symptoms. PCR is going to be detectable for approximately 4 weeks in the nasal pharynx, so think of the nose. You can isolate it from the respiratory tract. This is the red line for about a week. You can detect it in the stool for many weeks after infection. The two dashed lines are about antibodies. But there are many other ways of doing testing, not just PCR. Some of this is being used to do the so-called rapid tests. In China, when they didn't actually have testing available, one of the things that they did is they relied on CT scanning of the lungs, and they found that people who had it had a lot of fluid and had holes in their lungs. We do now have specially trained dogs who can smell people who've been infected, and for anybody who's got a smartwatch, it turns out that while you're pre-symptomatic, your heart rate is elevated, and if you've got a smartwatch and you're hooked up to a new app, the fact that you're infected can be detected beforehand, and you could at least then consult a physician to monitor yourself, or you could self-isolate before the symptoms come on if you don't want to pass it on. A lot of controversies over testing. I need you to read that for a minute. Thank goodness in Canada, they're not making us pay, but some people have been made to pay thousands of dollars in the United States, even though the tests typically cost a few bucks. Who's going to be given tests really matters. If the people who are really passing on the virus are the asymptomatic ones, but we refuse to do any testing on them, we complicate our management of this pandemic. How to use the test results is also quite problematic. You would think that it'd be a simple thing to count the cases, but it is not at all. Early on, doctors didn't even have a code in the ICD-10, so they had to invent one. It didn't come along until I think February. At which point, if you had a COVID patient, you could record on a person's chart that he had this disease. Otherwise, you had to be invented and coded as something else. So, for reasons we don't really understand very well, the infection hits communities in waves. If you add a lot of different communities together to get a large jurisdiction that's doing its reporting, such as, for example, the United States of America, with some 330 million people in it, all with isolated outbreaks that are communicating with each other, but happening at different points in time, the individual infections are going to add together, and you're not going to see that there's a wave in a particular city or a particular part of that city. You're just going to see one big wave. And in 1918-19, the H1N1 influenza had 3 major waves. The second was the most deadly in most places. This time around, it's not clear whether we're going to have 2. We're definitely having a second one now, or 3 or more waves, and we don't know which one is going to end up being the most deadly. And that's in part because the medical science is evolving very fast. So here is an example in the province of Ontario. You can clearly see the first wave peaking in late spring and the second wave starting in the fall. We have, what, 14 million people in Ontario. We've had about 72,000 cases. This is about a month ago. And the number is up closer to 100 now, 100,000 cases. Alberta had a small first wave and has had just a horrible experience in the last 2 months. Very large number of people infected. Shamattawa in northern Manitoba went from having almost no cases to have 8% of the community infected in a couple of weeks. And you can see here, they've tried to call in outside help because they are totally swamped. just not able to deal with this at all. And of course, there's no ICU up there. So in January, I'm going to be trying to look into how bad were the economic effects, who lost his or her job, what businesses have had to close, what happened to GDP, that sort of thing. Also, how have we been dealing with it medically? I think it's fair to wrap up by saying that the public health goal here has been that we not have to treat patients in hospitals. The medical care goal has been that we don't have deaths. And the societal goal was probably unclear to many before the pandemic began, but it has emerged to be that we find a way equitably to maintain enough activity in the economy to support both the public health and the medical care goals. So I'm just going to leave you with this slide sitting there. This is the blue background for the extra details section, and I highly encourage anybody who has the time to go and have a look at that. And now it's back over to questions.
Thank you, Dave. That was wonderful. You did a good job, and I have to tell you, you only took 50 minutes. So hey, well done. The practice worked.
In 4 seconds.
Anyway, I wanted to ask a question. When you were talking about the cytokine storm versus the bradykinin storm, it wasn't really clear to me with what is exactly a cytokine storm versus a bradykine storm.
Okay, so the best person to ask would be to ask somebody who's a medical doctor, which I'm not. As I said in the invitation, I'm a layperson, and I'm trying to give you what I understood from reading a lot of medical research and stories published in places like the New Yorker, New York Times, all of the news sources like Reuters. I can tell you this: the cytokine storm with influenza causes people to bleed from every orifice. The bradykinin storm is somewhat similar. It does cause the blood vessels to leak. And from a practical, I think the difference it's going to make for the medical community is that the medications that are going to work against one probably are not going to work against the other. So you got to know which it is with which you're dealing.
Okay. So they're trying to determine that then.
Correct. Research is ongoing on this, and at the moment, really a theory is something that's well established. So we do have a theory of gravity. This is more at the stage of a hypothesis, but the bradykinin hypothesis. So it may be that there's this particular peptide out there that is quite problematic, and if we could find a way of dealing with it, of blocking it, then we might be able to prevent people from getting so ill.
Thanks. Okay, first one up is Cameron. You have some questions or comments.
This was just in regards to whether or not we have a likelihood of mutation for this virus.
Okay, so that's covered in the companion document, the 80-page extra reading document that I mentioned. The virus does appear, yes, to be getting mutations. It appears at a slower rate than some people had feared. Some people feared early on that this virus was going to mutate very quickly and be very hard to. It does not appear to be the case at the moment, although thousands of small changes in the genome have been noted.
Thank you so much for that, Dave. Wonderful presentation.
David Percival, you're up.
That would be you. Okay, it's actually me,
Oh,
his
okay,
wife,
sorry.
Zelda. I have heard that the vaccine can affect fertility of women of childbearing age? Is there anything to that?
Okay, so in part because it's part of what I'm going to discuss in part 2 in January, I haven't extensively researched that. I don't know whether the vaccine was tried on anybody who was pregnant. They tend not to put people they think might be at high risk into the vaccine test groups. That includes usually children and seniors and pregnant women and people who've got serious underlying other illnesses, typically not in your vaccine volunteer groups. What I can tell you this virus, SARS2, does affect the sex organs. In particular, it's now known that this does affect the sperm in the male. There's even been at least one report that it may affect the ability to get an erection in a male. Maybe we'd have
Okay. Thank you.
social with public health measures if more men knew that.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, the next person up is Ted Manning.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Dave. That was your usual super and extra well done thing. Much appreciated. I have one piece of information you didn't hear today because it happened about 2 hours ago, which is they did actually answer the question of were there pregnant women involved. And there were about 20 of them involved inadvertently in one of the large testing who became pregnant during the process. And they have been monitoring them, and their very small level conclusion is that there was no notable negative reaction yet. So there is some information that might answer that. I have another question. Does climate or temperature have any impact on the levels of infection? Because it's very clear that, for example, Africa is reporting a lot less people affected. And I'm wondering whether that is due to actual changes because it's warmer or drier or whatever, or whether it is just due to lower reporting or the fact that they don't move around as much as we do to infect each other.
So there are already tens of thousands of research papers that have been published on this. There are already books out on this. The research continues madly. A lot of people have turned their attention to this. I think it's fair to say at this point, we don't know a good answer to your question. We've got some snippets, and the ones that are relevant, that many of which are mentioned either in the extra details in the presentation itself or in the companion document, are these. If you look worldwide at the very poor, the moderate income, and the rich, and by the rich, I mean people earning more than $12,000 a year, which we would consider to be poor in Canada, it's largely the rich who are getting this illness. My own personal opinion is that it's those people who are traveling and who are passing this virus amongst themselves. And the people who are very poor largely are not traveling. They're not on planes, they're not on cruise ships. They're largely staying at home, and they're largely not getting ill. We do know that, for example, in the world's biggest slum in Mumbai, they've had a very low infection rate. They've been able to control it. And this is largely through contact tracing and isolating the people who become sick. So that plays a big factor. I did go in the extra materials into the fact that there are a bunch of different things regarding local conditions that do matter to the infectivity of this virus. We can't really say that it stays alive in the air or stays alive on a surface for reasons that I explained. It's not alive in the first place, but it can remain infective in the air or on a surface. And it remains so for different periods of time, depending on the characteristics of the surface and the humidity, the temperature, the amount of light that's present, especially the amount of ultraviolet light that's present. So you can imagine the virus really likes, for all intents and purposes, if you want to say that, because it doesn't have a mind and can't like anything. It likes being at temperatures and humidities that are similar to what it'll experience in the body. So if it's very dry, the virus, the half-life of the virus, that is, if you had 10,000 of them in half an hour, if the half-life is half an hour, you'll only have 5,000 of them that are still infected. And half an hour later, you'll only have 2,500 that are still infected. If it's very dry, that half-life will be reduced. So it'll be a shorter period. It'll lose its infectivity. And you can cook it and you can freeze it, and it'll make a difference.
Thanks, Dave. That answers my question directly. By the way, the emergency alert you heard a moment ago was from Quebec on my phone, telling me that we all have to lock down in Quebec, that they're putting an emergency COVID alert in place.
Wow. Okay, thanks, Ted. Thanks, Dave. Jeff Passmore, you're up.
Well, thank you, Dave. That was a very interesting presentation and somewhat scary, somewhat upsetting. But I've got two quick comments, questions, or something I wouldn't mind your thoughts on. In one of the charts you put up, or one of the slides you put up, you mentioned that one of the reasons we're suffering less with disease is because, of course, of vaccines, and you mentioned antibiotics. And I just have a question about whether, you read a lot about our over-reliance on antibiotics creating superbugs and so on. So just wondering about your thoughts on that. And then with respect to the graph that you put up showing all those nice colored bars moving out to the right, and you said it's a good thing that Canada isn't on that graph. I don't think Sweden was either, and I just like your comments on what's happening with the Swedish experiment.
Okay, so superbugs first. Superbugs are extremely problematic. There is actually one guy listening to this who might remember that at the time in 2009, when H1N1 influenza was becoming a pandemic around the world, I was running around the office every morning trying to wave my little red flag and say, we got a problem, people. This could get extremely bad. And I did some calculations at the time and was wondering whether we might not have 70 or 80 million dead people in a short period of time. We were lucky in that particular instance that it didn't go that way. It remains to be seen whether it's going to happen this time with SARS2. A lot of people in public health and a lot of people in the medical community are very concerned that a superbug has the potential to do that. And we have many now that are resistant to all known antibiotics. Some of them might have one antibiotic. Often this type of drug is very problematic because it causes secondary effects in the body, side effects that you really don't want. So you don't want to be giving these drugs unless you're falling back as a last resort. But yeah, MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, has a potential to be devastating. As far as Sweden goes, very interesting situation, because if you were to look at the first wave that Sweden had, it wasn't particularly bad. They did have a worse experience than their neighbors. So Finland, Norway, and Denmark in particular did much better. They had stiffer social controls about where people could go, and they did much better than did Sweden. I actually saw an interview with the main person responsible for determining how Sweden was going to react, and he apologized publicly for having made the choices that he did. But that was, I think, maybe in July or August. In September, the second wave took off in Sweden, and they are being ravaged. You might remember the graph that I showed for Alberta. The graph for Sweden is scary. So
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And I actually went on, it seems to be supported by, I've been keeping track of the statistics of deaths per million population since October. And in Sweden's case, between October 8th and today, the deaths per million population has gone up by 138, whereas in Canada, it's gone up by 89. Now, in the US, it's gone up by 232. So they're doing a lot worse than Sweden. But, you know, Canada is certainly, so those are some interesting facts about, you know, you're looking at the deaths per million population. Yeah.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to follow it there, it is referenced in the talk. There's a site called Worldometers, and they have a COVID page. Johns Hopkins also has a page. A lot of the big scientific journals have put aside a section where all the material on COVID can be accessed free of charge. Most jurisdictions are publishing their data online, and if you were interested in looking at any one country or jurisdiction, you could probably go and find their data.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bill Pugsley, you're up.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Dave, for an excellent overview of the whole business. I learned a lot from what you said. As someone interested in air pollution, I'm used to looking, and really what we're dealing with here is a form of air pollution. I'm used to looking at the concentration, or as frequently as called, the dose. And I was struck by the two graphs you showed about halfway through your talk that had the black bars that indicated after a certain time, and I think it was 3 hours, that's when you've gone over the threshold. So I'm thinking of lessons learned and what to take back the next time I'm with a group of friends indoors, within my own household, or at a restaurant properly socially distanced. That it seems to me that having well-circulated air and not having the period last longer than 3 hours would be two must things to keep in mind. Would you agree? And while I'm along the same line, have you or Jean gone indoors at restaurants in the last 6 months, knowing what you do about the contagious?
And let me put these in reverse order. In the last, it's actually closer to 9 months. I've been in a restaurant twice, but it wasn't inside, 3 times, I'm sorry. It wasn't really inside the restaurant. Once we walked through the restaurant and went out onto an upper outdoor patio. Another time we were in an outdoor shelter with a lot of air circulation and the tables set wide apart. And the third time was the same. It was in an outdoor shelter, and we were a good 8 or 10 meters away from the nearest people. And I'm not going to do that again. I think if you go back and look in detail at those charts, you have to have something in mind for your own threshold. Like, is a 10% chance of getting infected too much for you to take? In which case, you probably shouldn't be there more than 20 minutes, half an hour. And if you think you can, withstand an 80% chance of getting infected, you could probably be there for 4 hours.
Okay. I've immediately reduced it from 3 hours to 1 hour in terms of my risk.
just not going, frankly. And just to link back to air pollution, you'll find in the extra readings that we do know that the more polluted the air is in a particular city, the more infection and the worse it's going to be. We don't know the reasons for this yet. The research is still continuing. It could be that the people in those cities have lungs that are more susceptible to getting or the nose may be more susceptible to getting the infection, or the people, because of the damage caused by the air pollution, for example, to their hearts, which we know is the case, they may get sicker. Another factor may be that the virus might attach to the surface. So to the surface of particles, extremely small particles, microdroplets really, that are in the air as pollutants and make it worse, because not only are you inhaling pollution, but you're inhaling pollution that is carrying virions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Dave. Steve Harris, you're up. John Hollins, you're on deck.
Hi, hello again, and first a shout out to Ted Manning. How are you, Ted? Follow on from that. David, we've been advised of the 3 primary preventative measures to take: masking, social distancing, and hand washing. Are there any other things of which you've been made aware in your researches that we should or shouldn't be doing as far as steps that we can take in our daily lives? Secondly, second question is, and you may be addressing this in your second presentation, do we run the risk, once vaccines become available or widely available, of complacency? In other words, hi, I just got out of jail free, and now I can run around without a mask and sneezing on people as I will. And then lastly, I have a 3-part question. Do you have an opinion about a fellow named Dr. Scott Atlas, who was at one time advising our man on his way out, shall we put it, in the US? Thanks.
Sorry, the name of the doctor in the 3rd part?
Scott Atlas.
Atlas. Okay. I don't recall running into Dr. Atlas. I'll have to go and look for him. There,
Yes, Atlas was the guy who was pretty much taking the Swedish approach and recommending letting everyone be infected to achieve herd immunity.
You might be interested, there's quite a long section in the companion document on herd immunity. Suffice to say that most people who are practicing in public health think the whole, and the medical community as well, actually, think the whole idea of relying on herd immunity is essentially throwing up your hands and saying, well, I might as well not practice medicine.
Yeah.
I think it's just a ridiculous notion to contemplate. On the other hand, I can tell you that place in northern Manitoba, they're at the level that the first guys that I saw discussing this were discussing is the level where you might be getting herd immunity right now. And that guy was at Harvard Medical School. He's the guy who runs the epidemiology program there. They're at 68% now. And they just called in, they are now calling on anybody who can help them because they're frantic. So
Right.
Thinking that you can rely on herd immunity, I think, is foolish. It will cause a lot of suffering, a lot of death that's totally unnecessary, which kind of links back to the other parts of your question. I'm going to try to do it in reverse order here. Yes, definitely. If you get the vaccine, you should not become complacent. There are already warnings happening from the public health community that once you've been vaccinated, you should continue to wear a mask if you're in proximity to other people. I would argue you should continue to be using social distancing from other people as well, because we really don't know yet whether, if the vaccine prevents you from getting severely ill, and that's their main outcome in these tests that they've been doing, the trials, you know. If it prevents you from getting seriously ill, does it prevent you from getting the infection inside your body and then passing on the virions to somebody else? We don't answer that question, and it's a crucial question. You can imagine, I said earlier that if it turns out that the virions are largely in the microdroplets and we're not stopping the microdroplets, we're going to continue to have this infection. Well, if the people we vaccinate continue to shed virus, they will continue to infect other people. So no, you should not become complacent until we know more about the effect of the vaccine. And then to go back to your first one, yeah, I think it's fair to say that the three main things have been masking, hand washing, and distancing. In fact, depending on where you are in the world, you may have a suite of as many as about 8 or 10 other things added to that list, I can tell you. As we will see when part 2 comes up, the masks are particularly problematic. You saw the model that I presented showed that if everybody's wearing a mask and you let everybody in that room with the asymptomatic patient go for 4 hours, 80% of them get sick.
Mm-hmm.
So the masks certainly are going to prevent you from coughing in somebody's face or sneezing in somebody's face. But the masks themselves, very interesting. I mean, if you've got a beard, for all intent, you have one, for all intents and purposes, the mask is not going to do what you are supposed to have done to your face with a mask. Everything that you breathe out is going to leak out the sides of that mask. Some studies have shown the most dangerous place to be around somebody wearing a mask is behind him, because the breath is going out through the sides of the mask and straight back. If the person were to happen to cough very forcefully or to sneeze into that mask,
Mm-hmm.
yes, it'll push the mask away from the face and the stuff will come out and go in all directions. It may not go right through the fabric. It'll just go out in all directions because it goes wherever the pressure's least. Are there other things that you should be doing? I don't know. I look at it this way. I've been told to wear a mask. I will wear a mask. It doesn't hurt me at all. It does fog up my glasses. So there are some circumstances in which I have to take off my glasses. There might even be some activities I can't do because I can't see. Fine, I'll just not do them. I've been doing this for 9 months. I think probably it's fair to say I spend 99% of my time in my house. Hand washing. Well, if I don't go outside my house and I haven't been in proximity to anybody who's infected, I don't need continually to hand wash. But I can tell you, if I have to go out shopping, when I come home, I unpack everything. Actually, I come home, I put the bags down, I wash my hands. Then I unpack everything, I wash my hands again. It is not necessary to try disinfecting all those things that you brought home from the store, because they have actually done some research that shows the amount of virus that's on typical surfaces is very low. So this whole idea early on that fomites were going to be a major route of transmission has in fact now shown to be not a major route of transmission. The virus is just really not there. I put that down probably, don't know for sure, to the fact that most of the viral load is in the microdroplets that aren't making on a surface. Distancing seems to me to be the #1 thing.
Yep.
But you know, there are a lot of people who can't social distance. For example, the guys I appreciate most in life right now are the ones who are stocking the shelves in my local grocery store. Without them, I can't survive. And they're going to have trouble social distancing. They have to be given as much protective equipment as we can, but as you'll see when I do part 2, in usual health and safety, the first thing you do is engineering controls. And the last thing you do is personal protective equipment. So anybody who's working in a factory, in a store, in an office where he has to be present should be given engineering controls to control the virus. We've got to have air filtering. We've got to have a lot more ventilation than normal. We've got to have people who are kept apart from each other, barriers in between them before we start telling them wear a mask. Because if you're sitting right beside me and we're both wearing masks and one of us is sick, you're going to get it.
I'd like to sort of cut that because a lot of that is going to be covered in the next talk. John Hollins, you're up, and Art, you're next. After
Thank you,
John.
David.
Thank you, David. When Art launched, proposed way back in early April that he recruited 4 KCOR members to do weekly talks. I thought, golly Moses, he's ambitious. We aren't going to keep that up for very long. Not only are we booked through until well into next year, the caliber of the talks has been extraordinarily good. And thank you for adding to that. That was just super. Just one technical question, perhaps for Art later on. Art will be posting this video and your slides, I'm sure, within a day. Will he be, and I presume he'll be posting the companion document as well. He can come back to on that one. I visit Costco. I have a spanking brand new Costco on Ogilvy Road. Very spacious. I go at 8 o'clock in the morning. The load of people is relatively small. I'm sort of trying to work backwards. You're coming at it as a scientist, and I normally do the same. But I've asked on 2 different occasions in my Costco, well, some months ago, how many members of the staff of Costco have been infected? And the answer at the time was none. I asked again this week, and the answer was, we have had 1 case, and that was a young person who works on the cash desks who went to a party with 30 other people. Now, Costco tells me that every employee, as they go in, has to visit a nurse who takes their temperature and asks a few simple questions. But when I look at the checkouts at Costco and I see these very simple plastic screens, and these days I go up to the fast lane where someone just checks your stuff in the car. There's a disconnect for me here. There are 300 plus employees in my Costco and 5,000 visitors a day. Don't know about the visitors, maybe some of those, but 300 plus employees over these months have not got sick except for 1 party animal. What am I missing here, do you think?
Well, an awful lot of businesses that need to remain open to the public are going to be very careful about what information they release regarding who's been sick and how that person got sick. So it's quite problematic. Not just Costco, of course, every organization. The place where we buy our groceries, and well, there are 3 or 4 in the near area. From time to time, they've come out with emails that said things like, well, we had somebody get ill and we've taken all these steps as a result. Fine, that certainly will help to keep people feeling better about being able to go to such a space. You could easily go onto the web and find out in your local community, what's the rate of infection? And if there are 5,000 people going through a particular store in a day, you can figure out the number of people who are likely infected. However, they're largely testing the symptomatic people. And a lot of those people, they may have something other than COVID. They might have another coronavirus that's infecting them, or they might have influenza or whatever. So you can't be guaranteed, but we think somewhere between, let's say, 20 and 80% of the people who get this don't get symptoms. They're the ones that worry me. So the person walks in, gets his temperature taken. What does it mean? 4 out of 5 people who've got the disease are going to have a normal temperature. Are you safe going through that space? Well, you have to answer that question yourself, because everybody's got a different risk tolerance.
The person I spoke to at Costco was actually the person on the checkout, on the exit door. So I don't think there was any corporate influence on what they had to say. but I'll come back with another second question if you want to pass on now, Jean.
Okay, yes, that would be good. Thanks, John. Art, you're up.
Okay, couple of things. I just want to maybe help address John's recent question there. I keep saying two things. Time. If I'm the checkout girl, I'm dealing with somebody and in 10 minutes or 5 minutes or less, they're moving on. So my exposure time is very small. And also say ventilation. You know, you do not want to breathe other people's air. Therefore, lots of ventilation is in your favor and is reducing your risk. And this leads really into my question, which before I go there, I do want to talk a little bit about John Holland's asked what's going to happen with all this data, and I noticed there's been some comments as well in chat. The plan is that I will be posting the complete set of slides which were presented. I will be posting as well the backup material that Dave has been referring to. I will be posting the YouTube once I get that up there, possibly later tonight, and as well as the chat record. I will make that all available on our website, and for those people who are not on regular circulation, all you have to do is go to CanadianCOR.com and say on Friday, then you will find a link there that will in fact give you all this information. Now, my questions now. It's two parts, Dave. I've read material, as have other people, on the effectiveness of ultraviolet C-band, and in fact, I've gone, as most people in KCOR know, I have made up a decontamination chamber from an old microwave oven, and I also have ultraviolet C radiation in my cold air return duct, such that I'm getting decontamination of all the air in the house at the rate of about somewhere between 5 and 6 times per hour, and which when I have to, when any of us go out and we have to come back, and they're carrying any, notwithstanding the hand washing and what have you, at least that potentially infected air is getting cleansed. And we do have the odd person who penetrates our home barrier in terms of people who have to do maintenance on the refrigerator and things like that. I just put it on very high full fan force to increase circulation and hence reduce the risk. So my question really is, Dave, is from what you have read, is UVC a good preventative measure? And as well, a companion question is the use of dietary items that have antioxidants, like I read where green tea, dark chocolate, and red grapes have a lot of antioxidants in it, and is beneficial to help prevent COVID-19. Do you have any comments on that?
Sure. I'm going to do the reverse order. On the dietary stuff, there have been some studies, no conclusive results yet, and it isn't the case that if you were to go and look at one of these things, you wouldn't find some people saying, yes, it works, and others saying, no, it doesn't. but there are two things that have been identified as possibly quite helpful. One of them is vitamin D, and this may be linked to the vitamin D levels in your blood. And I mentioned that people who are melanin deficient, therefore have higher levels of vitamin D in their blood, appear to be able to fight off the virus a little more easily. Certainly the case that a lot of people who are in long-term care don't get much sunshine, thus will have low levels of vitamin D in the blood, and it is not routine for them to get vitamin D supplementation. I'm taking a much higher level of vitamin D than I used to take. My doctor had encouraged me to take vitamin D. I told him how much I was taking. He said you need to double it. And that was before I found out from some reading I was doing of scientific research that vitamin D does appear to be helping at approximately 4 times the dose that my doctor had told me to take. And I've been doing some other reading. It's a very interesting vitamin in that it's quite water soluble. If you build up too much of it, you will just pee it out. There is very limited information. There's some information that says that vitamin D could be something on which you could overdose, but the amount that would be required to overdose is mind-boggling. You'd be eating pills all day long. And the other thing I'm taking is zinc. So zinc has been shown to have some activity against all those coronaviruses that cause what we know as the common cold. And there's some evidence that it has some role in either preventing infection or preventing infection from getting worse. So on the dietary side, I think those two things may well help. I'm not suggesting that you go and take them without medical advice. On the UV side, we do know that ultraviolet light will cause this virus to become non-infective much more quickly, on the order of minutes. So you don't need very much exposure to ultraviolet light to get the half-life down to a very short time. So highly likely that it would help to prevent anything that does get introduced into your house from causing a health problem near anybody else's there.
Thanks, Dave. Bert Vandenberg, you're up. And Jean Percival, you're on deck.
Thanks. Great presentation. We haven't really heard much about Chinese vaccines, and I'd like your perspective on whether that's because the vaccines really aren't there, or it's not trusted, or it's something else in the air in terms of willingness of Western governments to consider Chinese approaches.
Okay, so I haven't done extensive reading on vaccines yet because that's going to be part of the second presentation. First thing. Second thing is it's actually India that makes about half the world's vaccines. China does have the capacity to do so, and I'm sure they're going to get into the market as quickly as they can. They do now have an approved vaccine. I don't remember who approved it today. Might have been the UK. Anyway, somebody did approve one of the vaccines.
The UAE, United Arab Emirates.
Okay. So somebody did approve one today. The Russians, they approved at least one vaccine as long ago as about a month. So I'm sure they're in this as well. Virtually every country is making some kind of contribution to the attempt to find vaccines. When I first started reading about this, there were over 100 vaccines in development. So a lot of different ways of attacking this problem. They fall into 3 or 4 different major categories. Some of them are using attenuated virus, some of them are using live virus, some of them are using mRNA, so just a bunch of different ways of getting after these things. Did I answer your question? Bert?
He's muted.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Okay, Jean Percival, you're up.
I think Canada approved Pfizer vaccine today,
Yeah, they did.
according to my my sister's news.
Yep.
My question, Dave, and I don't know if you can answer it, but I know when President Trump was very ill with coronavirus, he was given the drug Regeneron, and then he was giving another drug, and then he was giving some steroids. And my friend who's an epidemiologist said that one of the drugs kind of suppresses the virus and the other one blows it up. So why is Regeneron, why was it so effective? Thanks. If you can answer it.
Well, I would be speculating because the information that came out with respect to President Trump's case was very limited. There were some very concerning facts about his case. In particular, he went into the hospital and came out within a few days. Highly, highly unlikely for that to happen, no matter what he was being given. Most people who get this virus don't recover for about 2 weeks. And most people who get this are flat on their backs. And then the particular medications that he was given, we know nothing about the mix. We know nothing about the doses. We don't know any specifics. So there's no way that anybody can make an educated guess as to what was going on there.
Thanks, Dave. Catherine Smith, you're up. Zach, you're on deck.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. This has been a wonderful session. I can't wait for part 2 as well. With Regeneron, I think it's a combination of, by the way, of 2 antibodies that are probably acting slightly differently. And there's been another one in the States that's also been approved, but it's a one single monoclonal antibody kind of mix. So I do think they're acting in different ways, but that's just an aside. And they're, probably having different strategies for combating the virus itself. But my actual comment that I wanted to make actually stemmed way back to when Jeff Passmore asked about superbugs. And I simply wanted to just reinforce the fact that antibiotics do not work on viruses. They work on bacterial infections. And I just make that point because I think there's a huge misconception on the part of many people that we might find an antibiotic that will help with the coronavirus, and that's very unlikely. Antibiotics will be able to help us with the secondary infections that you might get from coronavirus, but antibiotics do not touch viruses themselves. So yes, superbugs are a huge concern. Antibiotic overuse is a huge concern. It's probably not our biggest concern with the coronavirus right now. That said, the virus may mutate to become, as we've said, have some different qualities to it. But like Cameron was asking at the beginning, the issue there that Dave stressed, and I wanted to just stress it a little bit more, and that is that 99.9% of those mutations that are going to happen in the virus are going to be meaningless in terms of the way the virus actually does its job, which is simply to replicate itself. In other words, they're not going to make it worse. Only once in a while, when a super amazing viral lottery is won, will a coronavirus get a little bit more effective. Natural selection will favor those viruses that are a little bit better at infecting you and that sort of thing over time. But that doesn't seem to, as Dave said, is not appearing to happen with great sort of, it's not getting more infectious from what we can tell right now. So I just wanted to clarify those 2 things, that yes, superbugs are a huge issue, but they are for bacteria, not for viruses like the coronavirus. And just, sort of, there's lots of things to be concerned about here, but the superbugs is kind of a separate issue, I think.
Yeah, if I could just make a couple of comments with respect to that. You're absolutely correct. The superbugs, so-called, that we are battling right now are virtually all bacteria. And antivirals can be used to combat viruses. These are not in the various families of antibiotics. We really ought to be calling antibacterials instead of antibiotics, but we call them antibiotics. But there are some antivirals, the most famous of which at this point is remdesivir. And President Trump was supposedly receiving remdesivir. The last that I read about it is that the first clinical trial on remdesivir was positive, that is, that it would have some effect, but that there was a follow-up that showed that it did not. So the choir's out, learning their lines, and they're not ready to come back and sing it. The secondary infection thing is a very interesting one, because what kills most people with seasonal influenza is not the flu. It's secondary infection in the lung from any number of things that can infect your lungs, from pneumococcus to streptococcus to just a whole variety of things, some of which, by the way, can be superbugs. And if you get one of those after you've had influenza, you're probably not going to make it. So depending on what people want you to think, they'll either report a low flu death number or a high flu death number by including or, by excluding or including, in that order, the people who've died from a secondary infection. So far, it doesn't appear very many people are getting secondary infections. Certainly, I'm not reading reports of people getting secondary infections from having had SARS-2. And SARS-1 was so deadly that people never had a chance to get secondary infections.
Thanks, Dave. And Catherine, for your comments and discussion. Our last question will be coming from Zach, and then after that, we'll follow up with general talk. Zach, you're up.
Well, thank you very much, David. I enjoyed it. I am the one who remembers you going around the office asking how many tens or even hundreds of thousands of people were going to die from H1N1. If there is such a thing as a herd immunity to flu, and I'm not sure there is, it developed over a series of 10 decades. So we can't expect a herd immunity, I don't think, to show up within the first couple of months anyway of a new bug showing up. Anyway, I'm beginning to doubt that that's what happened with flu at all. More likely is what Catherine said, that the flu itself virus mutated slightly, got to the point that it infected people better, but the way it infected people better was by not killing them so much. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that isn't what I wanted to say. I wanted to ask, do you know if there's anything to be said? Okay, one more comment about Costco. I think parties are known to be super spreading events, and that kind of chaotic thing is going to turn out to be very important if it hasn't already been recognized in the spread of COVID. But supermarkets, not so much. But the question is, what about masks and a combination with face shields? Do you think that's going to be any good or not?
Okay, well, all right, I'll preface what I'm going to say by saying, at least in Canada, about 20% of the people who've become infected, it might be actually 20% of the people who died, I don't know for sure, because it's a while since I read this number, were healthcare workers. Mm-hmm. Now, certainly in some circumstances, healthcare workers have not had the personal protective equipment that they were supposed to have. However, these workers are supposed to be trained in how to use personal protective equipment. They're supposed to be given such equipment, and that equipment typically will include booties on the feet, a complete outer gown, often double layer gloves, at least one layer of gloves, often one mask, sometimes two, with a face shield and a hair cover. Yet these people are still getting infected. Now, you could say, well, it's because the guy didn't get the personal protective equipment that he was supposed to get. Or you can say that, well, she didn't wear her personal protective equipment properly. But I suspect that we're still getting a lot of cases where the PPE was being used, it was being used properly, and the person still got infected. Just yesterday, I got a paper that investigated what's happening with face shields. These things were
I'm on the order.
being suggested for
I'm
nurses
on the order.
who are in circumstances where there'd be the potential for a lot of generation of droplets. So intubating a patient in ICU, you can get a lot of saliva, at least, if not other materials, coming out of the patient. So they wanted everybody to be using face shields. But this went a little bit further in that you can now see, for example, if you're watching NFL football, there'll be a coach and he's wearing a face shield. Not clear to me, is he trying to prevent other people from getting his droplets, or is he trying to prevent himself from getting other people's droplets? What I do know is, and I only read the beginning of it because it's going to go into part 2, this scientific study showed that somebody wearing a face shield, even with a mask, if he coughs or sneezes, the mask is going to do essentially nothing. There's going to be a cloud of stuff that comes out and goes sideways, up and down from that shield.
Thank you.
Oh, parties are a big thing, and the other thing that's a really big deal is factories, workplaces, where people are in close proximity to each other on a production line kind of thing. Meat factories, probably one of the worst. They've had a lot of outbreaks of SARS2 at meat factories in places like Alberta, for example.
I just wanted to say, while we were studying SARS-1, one of the things that we were told was that healthcare workers are the ones that have to intubate the patients, and that this generates a flood of fluid, and that too could be how they're getting infected.
Yeah, so, and that's where you really probably can benefit from having a face shield that's going to prevent droplets from getting straight into your eyes, right? Doesn't mean it's going to prevent microdroplets from getting into wherever they're going to go, you know?
Okay, Dave, I'd like to say thank you very much. This was very informative, and I think you had a lot of good questions coming out from it, and I think we're going to be looking forward to part 2 coming up in January.
Well, I hope everybody stays safe until then. I hope you all can all come back.
Okay, thank you. Art.